To continue the budget build series for new players to Diablo 2 Resurrected, we have the Trap Assassin. While this build isn't nearly as fast as the Hammered In, the Fireball, Orb Sorceress, or even the Fishy Mancer, it more than makes up for it in consistency and reliability. Since this is a budget build, we'll be looking at this from the perspective of someone who needs to smooth out their equipment because they had terrible luck finding the gear originally, or maybe they prefer playing solo without trading. For this build, we're pretty much going to strictly assume that you are respeccing as you come from normal, since even the normal Trapsin will respec when they hit Nightmare. That said, there are a handful of variants of this build, but for today's build, we're going to approach the one that is the most straightforward and doesn't require any special tricks to make combat work properly, the Dragon Talon Trapper. This is technically a hybrid build between the low-cost kicker and a trapper, and will generally answer all of the issues you'll have with a normal trapper on a budget build with minimal effort. Stat-wise, this build goes straight for the required strength for gear, a pinch of dexterity for your weapon options, and then the rest into vitality. I would generally, again, lean towards 70 strength, though there are several items that can be really nice at higher strength, like Gore Riders and Spirit Shields, and even some amazing skill claws that require a good amount of dexterity. Those are going to be late game or post game types of equipment, so I generally don't worry about them until after I've beaten hell and gotten some better gear to justify the use of a second respec. As far as skills go, that's where the different types of trappers will diverge, and personal preferences come in, though one part remains true, that we put 20 points into Lightning Sentry to get our base killing machine in place. From there, you'll want to make sure that you have all of your 1-point wonders, Bursts of Speed and Fade being absolutely must-gets for excellent utility, and Cloak of Shadows being a great tool for dangerous situations. Beyond these, there's a bit of a preference discussion to be had. Some people prefer Mind Blast for crowd control, others prefer Shadows for companionship. For this build, we'll be a bit tight on points since we're hybrid, so we'll grab the 1 point in Mind Blast. You should still have plenty of points left over after this. That means we need to start investing in our last two main skills, Dragon Talon and Death Sentry. I personally like favoring Death Sentry a bit, generally getting Talon to level 12 with my Crushing Blow setup, around the same time I'd be maxing out Death Sentry. This gives you reasonable lightning damage on Lightning Sentry, a Corpse Explosion from Death Sentry, and 3 kicks from Talon. At this point, you should be nearing the end of Nightmare, and I would start investing in Fire Blast, since this will give you a bit more Corpse Explosion from Death Sentry, since for every 3 levels invested, it gives you an extra shot with it. So I generally take this to level 18 before plus skills. Beyond that, it's just investing either into boosting your traps with lightning synergies or getting more points in Dragon Talon. I personally like to let the rest of my gear handle Dragon Talon while I focus on synergies for a bit better crowd control. This basically gives you 2 strong traps for most of hell, a reasonable source of fire damage at range and Fire Blast, and a good boss killing attack in the form of Dragon Talon with Crushing Blow. For most enemies, my strategy is to drop 3 Lightning Sentries and 2 Death Sentries, and then just start kicking to set off the chain, though for Lightning Immunes, I will drop entirely Death Sentries and use Kicks and Fire Blast to set off the Corpse Explosion chain, and if overwhelmed, you can also use Mind Blast to buy you a second or two, and Cloak of Shadows to stop ranged enemies in the area from harassing you. This may sound like a lot of skills, but generally you're mostly sticking to 2 traps on right click, and the Kick and Grenade on the left click, with your backup skills rarely being used, but also on your right click. Mercenary-wise, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the best cheap Mercenary is again going to be Holy Freeze Mercenary, the Act 2 defensive Mercenary with an Insight polearm, which is Ral, Tyr, Tal, and Soul in a 4-socket non-magical polearm. And you're going to, again, just focus in on resistances and life leech on his armor and helmet. This will help you lay traps more easily without stressing about mana, and before it's said about Holy Freeze shattering enemies as they die, Holy Freeze actually causes very low shatter chance, so you will be fine, and you'll appreciate the slow against a lot of enemies. If you're really concerned about it though, Prayer would be my second pick for this build since you're not doing a lot of raw damage, and Blessed Aim would be my third pick to improve our chances to hit with those kicks, though it won't help as much as you think with only minimal dexterity. As far as equipment, this build is a bit of an odd duck. Despite being a kicker, the boots don't really matter, since we're assuming you didn't find uniques or set, so you'll just equip whatever boots you can find, and if you come across some better boots though, you'll want to look at Gore Riders or Goblin Toes for the Crushing Blow effect. Otherwise, just resistance stats as usual, since you're not speedrunning or anything or need something special. Gloves, on the other hand, are something you can control, and are a good, easy source of Crushing Blow with Blood Recipe gloves. Magic Heavy, Sharkskin, or Vampire Bone gloves, combined with a Nephrune, a Perfect Ruby, and a Junk Jewel, will give you gloves with Life Leech and Crushing Blow. And if you're lucky, maybe even some increased attack speed, though that last one is purely up to RNG. The Crushing Blow and Leash, though, are guaranteed. If you only have 1 ruby, this is probably where it should go. As far as the jewelry and belt, I would generally only worry about resistance stats, though leech can be nice on the slots that allow it. If you have the ruby to spare after your gloves, you can make a blood belt for a bit of bleed with the help of damage over time, which is nice on bosses and some tougher enemies. All you need for the belt is a perfect ruby, a tal rune, a junk jewel, and a magical mesh belt or mithril coil, but I would not make this before I make the gloves. In the socketed slots, we're going to go ahead and recommend the Lore Helmet, Ort and Soul in a socketed helmet, +1 all skills, lightning resist, and a few other mods. It's really hard to beat outside of some uniques and set items. If you enjoy kicks, there are a few crushing blow helmets that can be nice for this build, where if you prefer traps, it's fine to favor plus skills. Though if given the choice, I usually choose crushing blow to make bosses easy thanks to Dragon Talon, but these crushing blow helmets are specific helmets, which means if you're having bad luck, you're probably not going to come across them. In the shield slot, I'm actually going to recommend making 2 shields, either 2 ancient pledges with Ral, Ort, and Tal, or 2 rhymes with Shale and Eth, or you can mix and match them if you really want. These will give you resists, and in the case of Rhyme, even give you a pinch of Cannot Be Frozen. The reason we're doing this is you're usually going to be wanting plus skills on your trap hand, but you will want a weapon on swap for crushing blow against bosses. If you're not a fan of weapon swapping and you just want to go for one of these, I would go for Crushing Blow while trying to get through Hell just to make the bosses easier, but it's really not that big of a challenge to press W. In the weapon slot, we're looking for a few options. On your skill swap for traps, the easy choice is a Spirit Sword usually. Just save the stat points. Usually a broadsword with Tal, Thul, Ort, and Am is fine. Though this build can benefit a little from using a longsword instead for a bit faster trap laying speed. It's generally not worth it unless you have the runes to spare, since the broadsword spirit can be used on multiple characters, whereas the longsword one, not so much. You could also alternatively shop at the end of Nightmare using the red portal by Anya, if you remember not to get Neelithak's waypoint that is, to shop plus trap claws with increased attack speed. I usually skip this since it usually takes longer than getting the Spirit Sword, but you do you. On your boss fighting swap, or melee swap, whatever you want to call it, I would make black in a flail, with Thul, Io, and Neff. Since this gives you a good amount of crushing blow, and the knockback doesn't matter too much since act bosses can't be knocked back, and your kick is going to knock things back anyway if the final kick hits. An alternative is the slightly more expensive Crescent Moon in a fast sword with Shale, and Tyr for static field effect and ignore target defense, though it is worth noting, and this is an important note, that no, Crescent Moon does not affect or improve the damage of your placed traps. It's only there to help your kicks. Traps, unfortunately, are considered separate entities. Though these are both really nice options since they can both knock literal chunks off of, well, boss life and enemy life. Last, and definitely not least, in the armor slot we can stick with Stealth since it has a lot of useful mods to us. We could even go Neff and Lum in some armor and do Smoke for good resists. Duress even isn't that bad with Shale, and Thul for some crushing blow. But one armor is kind of the best of all worlds, and while useful for almost any martial character of any class, or even mercenaries for that matter, it really shines on this hybrid character. And that is the one a lot of people like commenting on, and that is Treachery. Shale, Thul, and Lem in a 3-socket armor. The reason this armor is so revered is because it has a massive increased attack speed buff of 45%, some faster hit recovery, and most of all, a level 15 fade when struck. If you have this armor, you can even go so far as to skip the point in Fade, and rely solely on this since due to how it's cast, it will give you 15% damage reduction and a ton of resist when active, which eclipses most normal investments in Fade. All of this would be great for any character, but throw in the +2 assassin skills and you can see why it kind of shines with this one in particular. And that's the Trap Assassin. There are actually a wide variety of different versions of this, some using Blade Fury, others using shadows, some pure traps, and others using tricks that require extremely expensive weapons. Though this one is by far one of the easier ones to just play through the end of Hell with, even whenever you have terrible luck. And with that done, we have the budget build to get you through Hell with each of the characters. So expect more starter guides, budget guides, and now even post-game guides on the channel, as well as more guides covering the secrets of items, classes, and skills.